Thunder! I'm just going to cut right to the chase here. Astro Bot is my game of the year. There is not a single doubt in my mind that this is the best game that I've played all year. I platinumed the game just a few days ago, and it was one of the most fun experiences I have ever had getting a platinum trophy for a game. Now, of course, you've probably heard everybody else singing the praises of this game, but you might be wondering what exactly makes this game so special. I mean, there are plenty of reasons to love this game, but before we even go into that, I want to go on a little bit of a history trip and talk about Astro Bot's inception and how we even got here. Astro's first title came to us in the form of the Playroom. It was developed by Team Asobi, which at the time was part of Japan Studio. It was the pack-in title on the PS4. Now, this was before Astro even had a name. This was Team Asobi's first project meant to showcase the PS4's capabilities, integrating both the PlayStation camera as well as the DualShock 4. It was a fun little collection of augmented reality experiences, and one of such experiences featured a bunch of tiny little robots known as the AR bots. The design of these would come to be the genesis of Astro Bot himself. Then there was a follow-up for PSVR in the form of the Playroom VR. Once again, it was another collection of minigames, this time demonstrating the new VR capabilities. One of these titles was called Robot Rescue. It was the first real starring role for Astro as we know him now, and laid the groundwork for what would eventually become Astro Bot. Now, this title was so well received that they ended up spinning it off into Astro's first full-fledged title in the form of Astro Bot Rescue Mission. Rescue Mission once again showcased the PSVR capabilities, but it was also a much more realized 3D platformer. Now, this title also had the gameplay loop from Robot Rescue of rescuing the various bots across numerous levels, but it also introduced many elements that would be expanded upon in Astro's latest outing. These include much of the music, enemy designs, and even most of the boss designs from this game were brought over to Astro Bot. Finally, the last big step on the way to Astro's latest game was, of course, Astro's Playroom, the free pack-in title for the PS5 that was most players' first real introduction to the character. This was less of a campaign like Rescue Mission and more of a tech demo showcasing everything that the PS5 and DualSense were capable of. Like with Rescue Mission, many elements from this title would also carry over into Astro Bot. Now, at the time when Astro's Playroom was first released, there was a lot of restructuring going on at Japan Studio. Now, unfortunately, as many of you may now know, Japan Studio is defunct. However, a lot of the key players at Japan Studio got absorbed into what is now the full studio of Team Asobi, and Sony was so pleased with the work and reception on Astro's Playroom that they basically gave Asobi the green light to go ahead and make a full-fledged title for Astro Bot, which now brings us to today, the titular character's first true full-blown game and the culmination of all of Team Asobi's hard work up until this point. The game takes everything that was already good about Astro's previous titles and just expanded on them significantly. Now, it is true that this game does share a lot with Rescue Mission, but the thing is, everything has been recontextualized in this game in such a way that even for those who played Rescue Mission, the game still feels incredibly fresh. Astro has never controlled better. I played a bit of Astro's Playroom before this game was released to refamiliarize myself with the character as well as collect the special bots added to the game in the lead up to release, but going from Playroom to Astro Bot, there's definitely an improvement. Of course, Astro still has his basic platformer moveset, but everything feels so much snappier and more polished. I think Astro actually benefits by having a more simplistic moveset because it allows for more power-ups and mechanics to be added into the mix without making Astro's moveset feel too bloated. To go more into these mechanics, Astro's Playroom already played around with the different power-ups for Astro, but some of them could feel a bit clunky at times, and it felt like they broke up the flow of the gameplay. This time around though, everything just feels like it works together much more naturally. Take the monkey power-up for example. In Playroom, Astro would enter a monkey suit and would take on climbing challenges executed by using the DualSense triggers along with motion controls to scale walls. This same climbing mechanic is still present in the version of the power in Astro Bot, but rather than breaking up the gameplay, the monkey is just added as another layer on top of Astro's existing moveset. Astro can still run around, jump, punch, and hover, but now he can also climb up the walls with the monkey and also use the monkey now to throw rocks at enemies and other obstacles. It just feels like a perfect evolution of the more gimmicky type powers seen in Astro's Playroom. It also helps that each and every level feels perfectly designed around whatever mechanics are present within it. Plenty of mechanics are reused used throughout the game as well, but each level seems to find something new to do with each mechanic every time, so it never feels like the game is getting stale or repetitive. To go even further with the level design, there are even challenge levels that really test your platforming skills by using everything that the game has thrown at you thus far in sort of these gauntlet type stages, utilizing various different mechanics, and let me tell you, some of the challenge stages can be genuinely difficult. They're not unfair, but they really do put your skills to the test. I mean, they're hard for even more experienced players. Aside from the challenge stages, Astro Bot is not a very hard game, and that is why I like it so much. Is it's very accessible for players of all ages and experience, and in that sense, it does really feel like Astro could be seen as sort of PlayStation's Mario. In fact, before I move away from talking about general gameplay, I do want to touch on that conversation that many players have been having about Astro Bot's obvious source of inspiration. Now, I'm not suggesting that Team Asobi ripped off Nintendo in any way, shape, or form, but you can absolutely see the Mario influence in Astro Bot's gameplay and general structure. It especially invokes similar vibes to that of Mario Galaxy, to the point where some even call this a bit of a spiritual Mario Galaxy 3. But don't get it twisted, Astro Bot still builds something very original on top of this foundation, and I mean, come on. Mario is often seen as the gold standard for platformer games, so yeah, a lot of 3D platformers are going to turn to Mario for inspiration, but where I think Astro really succeeds is in the way that it not only takes inspiration from these games, but it executes them in such a way where it often elevates some of these existing platformer concepts and manages to carve out its own distinct identity that truly feels unique to Astro Bot. Anyways, gameplay is just one aspect of what makes Astro so special. The presentation of the game is what really drew me in the first place. One thing that I've always loved about the Astro games are their design and art direction. Not just of the environments, but of Astro himself. Some people have called Astro's design somewhat generic, and while I can see where they're coming from, I actually think that Astro's design works perfectly for what he is. Up until his latest entry, all of Astro's outings have essentially just been tech demos showcasing the latest and greatest in PlayStation hardware, so it makes sense for Astro to have a more sleek and futuristic design to go alongside that. And of course, having a more simplistic design also allows for Astro and the other bots to easily adopt features of other PlayStation characters. The bots also have this childlike design to them too. Asobi has even stated that this was intentional in order to make players feel more attached to them, like they had to protect and watch over them. That design choice also lends itself well to the idea that they're more curious and more playful, which fits perfectly into the concept of having to search for the various bots throughout these levels that essentially feel like big playgrounds. The general design philosophy for Astro and the other bots extends into the levels as well. Not only do these worlds feel more alien, giving a sense of wonder, not too dissimilar to what Nintendo did with Mario Galaxy, but these worlds also incorporate a ton of tech and more futuristic elements into every facet of these levels. It gives a lot of these levels sort of a World of Tomorrow type feeling, with sort of this optimistic futurism in the design philosophy, which also goes along with the idea that Astro and the other bots live inside PlayStation hardware. I mean, if Sony is pushing the latest and greatest tech, it makes a lot of sense to have environments and worlds that reflect that philosophy. Now, of course, I have to mention the music as well. Kenneth C.M. Young returns for his third time composing for Astro. Many of his songs from Rescue Mission and Playroom make a return in this game too, with some of them receiving new remixes as well. The score of these games fit Astro perfectly. The music feels like pure concentrated fun. I don't really know of any other way to put it. It's got a lot of funk and old school vibes to it that harken back to the earlier days of PlayStation, and the synthesized robotic vocals really add a lot of flair to these tracks. It's the type of music that gets stuck in your head for days on end, and I think it really is the best choice of music for Astro Bot. I also have to mention the DualSense features and how perfectly this game takes advantage of them. The haptics of the controller already felt amazing in Astro's Playroom, and this game just pushed that further. You feel every single step that Astro takes, every drop of water that falls on his head, the resistance in the triggers when pulling on certain objects or enemies. The DualSense feels alive, and it gives us, the players, a greater feeling of immersion, like we are right there in the world alongside Astro. I cannot stress enough that more PS5 games have to take advantage of these haptics, and I honestly think that they need to become a standard for controllers across all systems at this point. They're that good. Okay, so now that I've gone over a lot more of the general surface level stuff with this game, this next section is going to go deep into spoilers, and I want to really talk about all the different cameos and late game content, so if you don't want to be spoiled about anything, go ahead and go to the time listed on the screen now, because we're going into spoiler territory in 3, 2, 1. Guys, holy shit. I cannot believe some of the cameos that are in this game. Like, of course you have all of your obvious cameos from PlayStation like Kratos, Nathan Drake, Aloy, Ratchet, etc. But then a lot of them have dug very deep. They got the Devil from Devil Dice, Vibri from Vibribbon, Robbit from Jumping Flash. That one was really crazy to see because if you don't know, Jumping Flash is one of the first 3D platformers to ever exist. Like, yeah, of course it's important to PlayStation history, but more importantly, it's such a huge part of the history of 3D platformers as a whole, so I'm really happy that I got a cameo in this game. But even for the cameos that weren't as obscure, there were still a lot of really interesting choices because, yeah, you have a lot of your PlayStation first-party characters, but a lot of the really big cameos in this game came from third parties. Now, they were third-party characters that are heavily associated with the PlayStation brand, but it was still really cool to see a lot of these nonetheless. Some of my favorites were Klonoa, Kiryu, there's a Fall Guy in here, which I think is really funny, Kena from Kena Bridge of Spirits. That one makes a lot of sense because not only is it a good game, but Kena Bridge of Spirits was part of that original marketing push for the PS5, so that's a fun little nod, I think. And on that same topic of PlayStation marketing, I do have to mention how cool it was to see both Toro and Kuro, because even though they're not marketing characters per se, they basically became the unofficial Sony mascots, especially in Japan. They appeared in so many different games as crossovers and cameos, and then in the West, I think the most notable way that people got to know them was through their inclusion in PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale as playable characters. And speaking of that game, I also have to mention how cool it was to see Polygon Man, because not only was he one of the original marketing mascots for PlayStation, but he was also the boss of PlayStation All-Stars, and as a big fan of that game, it was really cool to see him in this. Alright, well, I think that's enough about the general cameos in the game. If I kept talking about those, we'd be here all day. So what I really want to talk about is those End of Galaxy levels that were based on specific PlayStation franchises. These blew me away. We already sort of knew about the God of War level from marketing, but I did not expect there to be as many of these types of levels as there were. Being able to play through what were basically smaller versions of these respective games, but as Astro, was an amazing idea. Once again, going back to why Astro's simplistic design is so beneficial, it allows him to sort of become these characters and adopt their signature abilities on top of his own moveset. Now, the Ape Escape level was my favorite. It was a much more watered down version of Ape Escape, of course, but just being able to go around with Spike's net, catching all of the different monkeys, was really fun. The other cameo level that caught me off guard was Loco Roco. I remember beating the Chameleon boss expecting Aloy to appear, only for Kulche from Loco Roco to show up out of the plant, and then his level was absolutely amazing, having it be fully motion controlled, and it just felt like an exact replica of Loco Roco's gameplay, and you can just tell that through all of these levels, Team Asobi has so much love and passion for all of PlayStation's history. I especially love how they handled the final boss sequence. Flying through space on various PlayStation hardware with all of the character bots helping you along the way was an incredible finale. I do have to admit that the music choice did catch me off guard. Starting off the level and all of a sudden hearing a song from Thunder Force was something that I could have never expected, and yet it fit perfectly into the scene. This whole sequence basically felt like the end of Avengers Endgame, but with PlayStation IP. So much passion went into this game, and when all is said and done, it still feels like it's a bit soon to really tell, but if this level of quality for Astro continues into whatever comes next for him, I think that Astro Bot is a very strong contender for being the new face of PlayStation. But of course, I do have to talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to all of this. Now, this isn't a slight against Team Asobi, but rather the PlayStation higher-ups. What the hell are they doing? They have all of these amazing IPs celebrated in Astro Bot, and yet they serve as a reminder that a lot of these franchises have just been left to rot. Recently, you have the company's CFO going on record saying that PlayStation doesn't have enough original IP. That is complete and utter bullshit. PlayStation has so many beloved IP that fans have been begging for a return to, and you're going to really tell me that you can't do anything with those? It just feels like these executives are extremely out of touch with what the fans want. Just look at what happened with Concord. Now, I'm not here to slam on Concord. I don't think it was a poorly made game by any means, and I do think that the developers behind this game really did make a game that they believed in. But the problem is that the executives who allowed this game to release didn't take the time to realize that maybe this wasn't the type of game that that players want right now. Compare that to how well Astro Bot was received, and it really starts to paint a picture that PlayStation needs to seriously reevaluate a lot of their decision making. Anyways, I hate to get all doom and gloom like that, but there is a silver lining to this. If Astro continues to sell well, and let's say that it does win Game of the Year, I do have hope that PlayStation is actually going to take this reception to heart and try and refocus their efforts a bit more into going back to their roots. Now, I'm not suggesting that we can't have big cinematic story-driven games anymore. I mean, I love The Last of Us, I love Uncharted, I love the new God of War. It's just, we have to be able to have a balance between those types of games and the wackier, more unique and experimental types of games that PlayStation used to be known for. Hopefully this means that Astro Bot has a very bright future ahead of him. I just worry that these PlayStation higher-ups might have the wrong takeaway from Astro's success and only double down on the nostalgia pandering aspects. Astro is always going to be heavily tied to the PlayStation brand, but I think his games also need to be able to continue to have an identity of their own. Basically, I don't think that Astro Bot's future needs to be fully reliant on PlayStation's past. However, as long as Team Asobi keeps leading the franchise, I don't think we have anything to worry about. Astro is an incredible homage to PlayStation and the platformer genre as a whole, and I can't wait to see where Astro goes from here. But for now, I think that's enough out of me. So if you guys like this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Later.